Today on Accidental Experts with Bryce Hamilton.
Welcome to the Accidental Experts podcast. I'm your host, Bryce Hamilton. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and a child and family therapist. I have been in practice for over 15 years, and I'm also a mom of 4. So I know the challenges both professionally and personally. I'm so glad that you're here today to grow your parenting toolbox. Please come as you are and be ready to learn. My goal is to make you the accidental expert so that you can raise healthy humans. Hi, everyone. Welcome back. I'm so glad you're with us today. So we are going to be talking about how to keep the romance alive. There's so much to having a relationship with your partner, especially with kids. And we're going to talk to a marriage expert who is a licensed clinical social worker. And her name is Amanda Liñan. And she's going to be talking to us about how we can keep the spark alive and navigate relationships with kids. With that, let's get to Amanda.
No, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, so we're going to be talking about such an important topic, especially when it comes to couples and rearing children. And that's to talk about how to keep the romance alive.
Mm-hmm. Definitely an important topic. It's hard to do. It's difficult.
Yeah. But it is possible.
Absolutely.
I think you have a lot of tools and skills to help us navigate that dynamic. But I think when we're in it, it can feel like you're drowning sometimes, or like there's not enough time for each person that you love.
Yeah, it's a whole different adjustment when you have kids because the relationship just fundamentally has to shift.
Yeah. Which I think, I laugh because no one really prepares you for having children. They're like, have children, it will be fun. Right. And then you don't think about the complexities of just having kids sometimes. And then the way that it will change with your partner.
Yes, exactly. And then I think even the ways that people do try to prepare you, nothing will prepare you for what's actually happening and how it actually feels to be in it. There's no preparing. Yes. And people often minimize the difficulties and it's totally possible to flourish.
Yeah. Okay. So can you tell us what are the most common challenges that you see in couples after having kids?
Yes, of course. So I see it differently for mothers, fathers, and the relationship. Mm-hmm. So, with mothers, I think it's most often total reframing of self. It's who are they besides mom? Mm-hmm. What's the difference between the two? And then the expectations of just being a mom make it difficult to choose oneself. So even if you want to rediscover who you are, find yourself again, just, the expectations, the guilt, the shame that come with that make it really hard to want to choose that. But for moms, I most often see this idea of I need to find myself again. I don't even know who I am. I don't recognize myself. With fathers, it's the shift in their partner and the relationship. I mean, they know, of course, that baby's going to come first. Kids are going to have to come first in a lot of ways, but to actually live that experience, like we were saying, it's different. It's difficult to suddenly feel like, oh, I'm lowest on the totem pole in the house now. I have to take care of baby. I have to take care of mom who just had baby and who's taking care of me. And so that's a different dynamic, I think, for a lot of men to deal with, is just the support and attention decreases in ways that it feels different than what they expected. And then in terms of relationship, the time and the focus has to shift. You have less time, 100%, you have less time. You just do. And then when you do have time, do you have the energy? And then the focus in general just has to sort of, okay, how do we keep these little beings alive and do what's best for them? And, as a parent, yes, you have to choose yourself and you can't pour from an empty cup and all those lovely things. But the reality is, at the end of the day, you still have to keep this person alive. And so you can't always choose yourself. The focus does have to shift at least a little bit.
Yeah, thinking about that in my own relationship. I think, we have 4 kids, and there are so many times where I don't have any time for myself or feel like I don't have any time, right? And it's there's only so many things that you can like put off. Like some of the stuff is like pressing, like you have to, right? And then it sucks when you feel like I don't really have time for my partner. Like I want to, right? Like what I want is to just like, sometimes I'm like, we should run away. I mean, not literally, but like, I'm like, get a babysitter or whatever, grandparent or whatever it is, but like literally run away from this place because
Like
it
a
is
sleep,
so,
you need that.
yes, exactly. Because it is exhausting. And the person that I do want to prioritize is myself and also my partner. But it's so hard sometimes because
Yeah,
there's so many other demands.
exactly. And you can't always choose yourself because,
Yeah.
okay, I don't want to make dinner today. Well, that's not an option. Like you have to
Yes.
people.
Yes.
So sometimes, you do have to wait, and it's difficult. How do you find the time for
Mm-hmm.
yourself, for your partner? And both of those things are very much intertwined in my mind of finding time for self, finding time for partner,
Yeah.
and to keep
Because you
that
want to.
romance alive.
Yes,
Yes.
exactly. Yes, yes. Okay. So, what advice do you have for parents in terms of how to prioritize their relationship with their partner, especially when we're talking about being exhausted and overwhelmed, like we just described? Like, you are exhausted, you
Yeah.
are overwhelmed, and what tips you have for being able to prioritize that partner and or self?
I could get into some specific tips and habits and whatnot, but I mean, I do think it really has to come from both. There has to be this intentional leaning in and grace for you are both in a very hard place right now.
Mm-hmm.
And the only way to stay connected is you're both leaning in. So both people really have to understand and choose to lean in certain moments. So, I mean, emotionally, mentally, physically, sexually, all of it. Like you have
Mm-hmm.
to, at the end of the day, it is a choice in a lot of ways. And there are things that make that choice easier. But at the end of the day, it's still a choice. So like you
Mm-hmm.
have to choose to lean in at times, even when you're tired. And it doesn't
Mm-hmm.
have to be the same as it was before you had kids. It can be a smaller version of that. Instead
Mm-hmm.
of sitting on the couch for 2 hours, hanging out, watching something and talking, maybe it's 20 minutes. And that can be okay. And being okay with that and learning to lean in, like, this is our new normal and this can be okay.
Mm-hmm. So adjusting time, what other areas do you feel like have to be adjusted?
So, in terms of how to actually stay connected, right? And it really is the small little things. So I use a lot of Gottman method out of the Gottman Institute, which is a very research-based model of working with couples. And the research is very clear. It is the small things that matter the most. So grand gestures, big dates, vacations, those are great, and it's not going to cut it on its own. So, three main things I would say people need to do is one, schedule consistent check-in times daily and weekly. So the daily one is really just, the Gottmans call it the stress reducing conversation. And that's what it's for. It's to debrief on your day, to talk about your feelings and connect and offer each other support. It's the opportunity to be there together and manage the outside stress together. Outside stress is anything that's outside the relationship. So it can be kids, it can be work, it can be anything else. So the weekly one, I mean, they call it State of the Union, but that one is really a game changer. Whenever I have my couples do that one, it's noticeable when they start, and it's noticeable if they start slacking a little bit, as happens sometimes. Because it's not just about checking in on how they're feeling, it's about checking in on the state of the relationship. State of the Union, right? How is the relationship going? How did the relationship feel for you last week? What went well? What was difficult? And it's taking this more objective approach of, are you getting the things you need? Am I getting the things I need? And if not, how do we change that? So it addresses a lot of the problems that can arise before they do arise. And it heads them off at the pass, which is really great, because once resentment sets in, it's a lot more difficult. If you can catch it before resentment, that's great. And then you can actually do something about it. So, it's daily, we're talking 10 minutes. Weekly, we're talking 30 minutes to an hour. So it's very, very doable when we talk about what do you do when you have young kids, especially if you have, more than one. honestly, sometimes it's easier with more than one because they have people to occupy them. But, it's taking that intentional time to actually talk and
Mhm.
not just talk about the kids, but talk about yourselves. The other great part about the State of the Union is that you can bring in business things. What do we have going on this week? We have 4 appointments. Who's going to take the kids? Who's going to take them to school? Who's going to pick them up? I need help with this. This chore needs to be done. Who's going to do it? So you're able to split some of that labor that happens a little bit
Mhm.
more instead of scrambling last minute, which is very, very stressful and
Yeah.
can lead to a lot of blame, misunderstandings, those kinds of things. So heading that off at the pass is great too.
Yeah, I love this idea. It's kind of like an appointment, like a therapy appointment almost, right? With your partner of like, I find that in my practice, like you can wait. Like a lot of times, even when I'm going to see my therapist, I'll be like, oh, okay, I want to make sure I want to talk about that. So it's like you can delay some of the stuff until that time that you know you're going to connect. So that helps to not have that resentment of like, okay, we're going to address this
Yeah,
on Thursday or whatever your day is that you have set. And then you know that you'll be able to bring that up and like you guys are going to work together to come up with a solution. I love that.
exactly. Yeah. And I think a lot of people are tempted to do is, hey, this really annoyed me, but it's not a big deal. So I'm just going to put it away. It's not
Hmm.
worth it. Then if it happens again, that ratchets it up a little bit
Hmm.
again, right? And pretty soon it's this huge deal that you
Yeah.
could have brought up a long time ago. So, when it was really easy.
Hmm. And it
So,
does get harder. The more that something's happened, then you're like, oh, I should have brought that up before.
yeah,
Will they change, right? Like these questions that
exactly.
you have, like, is it changeable? Like maybe I just need to accept this. Something I love that the Gottmans say, because I've read a lot of their books, and I think they talk about how, like, in couples, that if both people are wanting to manage the relationship or save the relationship, depending on what level you're at, that
Yeah.
like that's all it really takes is like, I mean, obviously there's a lot more to it, but like
Yeah.
if you have that desire to repair it, work on this change, whatever, that the research shows that those couples can do it if they
Oh,
put
absolutely.
that commitment to it. And I think sometimes people are like maybe putting things off because they're like, ah, this will never change. And then you get so frustrated
Yeah.
about whatever it is. And then you might be the person who actually doesn't want to do the work to save the relationship or change something, right? Whereas before, it would have been something that you might have more easily been able to repair.
Exactly. Bringing it up early and often, right? It might feel
Mhm.
like nitpicking, but really, if you're bringing it with the approach of, hey, this is something I need help with in
Mhm.
our relationship and making it safe for both people to do that, it's actually a really lovely thing. And both people feel very much relieved almost that they have the space and someone willing to listen. It's really
Yeah.
lovely, actually.
Yeah. So talk to me about that. That's a good point because I think it's all about how you say it too. Because if you do this like
Yeah.
weekly State of the Union and you're like, okay, so I'm really mad at you because you did this thing. I'm so frustrated. Is that the mechanism that we're coming at this with? Or is there better ways to phrase things to help our partner understand how
Yeah.
we're feeling?
Yeah. So the Gottmans talk a lot about the Four Horsemen, which, if you read his books, you're probably familiar. For
Yes.
anyone not familiar, the Four Horsemen are patterns of communication that, if left unchecked, are more than likely going to end the relationship. They're that severe, they're that serious. You have to keep them in check. And what that means is they're going to happen. People have,
Mhm.
I lean towards criticism. That's just, something I have to know and manage,
Mhm.
right? But because I know that, I can keep myself in check when I'm talking to my partner and when I'm frustrated.
Mhm.
And so there's 4 patterns. They're going to happen, and it's apologizing for them and owning them when you do make the mistake, and it's trying to prevent them. So the first one is criticism, as I said, so blaming the person instead of the situation. Um, the antidote to that is gentle startup. And that's something that I recommend as a basic skill with, no matter what. I mean, the way a conversation starts is the way it's most likely going to end. If you start it really nice and calm and gentle, that's a good sign for the way the conversation is going to go. So
Mhm.
instead of being like, I'm so annoyed at you for doing this, which is
Mhm.
just going to put them on the defensive, which is the second horseman, saying, hey, I'm really frustrated that I asked for this thing to get done and it didn't get done. It's not about your partner. It's about the situation that happened. This thing didn't get done. That's frustrating. Most people can empathize with that. And then you're throwing out some sort of line, some sort of like call for help, right? I'm frustrated that this didn't happen. Is that something you can do right now? Do we need to talk about, would it help to talk about division of labor? Would it help to, what do you need to make this happen? It could be any number of things, but it's just basically some sort of like, I need, I want, I wish statement to reach out and ask your partner for help. That way you're not just dumping all these feelings on them and they're like, great, what do I do with that? I just screwed up again. It's not about that. All right. So it changes kind of the tone of that instead of putting people on the offense, defense. So as I said, defensiveness is the second horseman. And when we're criticized, our first instinct is to defend. And especially, no one escapes childhood unscathed. Like we all have wounds from childhood. Sometimes you're going to be extra sensitive about something and you might get defensive for something that maybe doesn't warrant it. So noticing when defensiveness comes up in you, when you feel like you're fighting back instead of listening, those kinds of things. Contempt is a more extreme version of criticism. It's belittling, it's demeaning, it's mocking, it's sarcasm, it's anything that really serves to put you above your partner. It feels really bad. It's difficult to recognize sometimes because a lot of times it is tone or it is facial expression. It's the kind of thing that could be contempt. And then stonewalling, which is shutting your partner out. It's the silent treatment. It's not taking a break. It's different. It's the silent treatment.
It's intentional.
Exactly. It's meant to teach your partner a lesson. It's meant to push them away. It's meant to, maybe it's just you shutting down. But that's not going to serve the relationship and it's not going to serve you in the long run. So those patterns of communication, doing things to avoid those, the gentle startup's great. Defensiveness is a lot about taking accountability. Like what piece can you own? Even if it's 1%, what can you own? And bringing that to the table. All right. Contempt is a lot about talking about your thoughts and feelings instead of going into contempt. What is the need? What are the feelings? And then just developing a culture of appreciation within your relationship, right? That's a really strong way to avoid contempt is if you are often appreciating each other and feeling appreciated, it's a lot harder to go into that. And then stonewalling, it's physiologically self-soothing. It's not letting yourself get into fight or flight, or if you do, it's calming yourself down.
Which is hard. And sometimes we need additional support, right? Like we need tools and strategies to do that. So just not doing it is sometimes, it's not that easy generally, but like sometimes that might be the right time to get a therapist, right? To like work on those kind of things, or working on meditation, or listening to different things that talk about how to manage those emotions. Something I heard the other day was that you cannot hold gratitude and anger at the same time. Like it's not possible to do both. And so I was thinking about the contempt part and how like practicing that gratitude, right, all the time. It's really hard to be grateful and upset, like finding the good in life. And it doesn't mean ignoring the problems, right? But just like truly being like, I'm thankful I have a partner who's willing to work this out with me, or is willing to like hear me out, right? Even though I am really frustrated by their behavior, being able to find those pieces. And even with my kids, sometimes the other day they were like bickering in the car and I was like, I just yelled gratitude. And they were like, what is mom doing? She's literally lost her mind. And I was like, I'm just trying to be grateful for this moment, like to bring myself back into this moment of like how thankful I am to have all of these humans in my car, healthy, right, with the ability to talk and like navigate through problems, and like just trying to bring that back up because I was getting frustrated. Right. And so it's definitely, it helped me. So, if you need to yell gratitude, it might help you too.
It'll certainly make people listen.
Yes. Yeah. They'll be like, huh, what is up with that? Yes. And it is hard. And I think all these pieces, like the Gottmans, as you referenced, I mean, they are the game changer, I think, in marriage therapy in terms of like doing all the research. They've done such important research for that area of therapy and understanding what can predict. I love that they know like what can predict relationships that are going to stay together versus people that will end in divorce or separation. And not that I love that they can do that, but it's like there are things that we all do in relationships that either help us to have healthy long-term relationships that like can navigate through the challenges or are not going to be able to make it over all the hurdles because hard stuff is going to happen.
Mm-hmm. It's going to happen. Absolutely. And yeah. And what I love about it too, is that it holds up, right? So the research, I mean, you see it in the room, the things that you can do about it, it works and it's great, right? So that you can actually know, great, if I am working with Gottman, then I'm going somewhere, which is great. Yeah. I mean, their books are really accessible too, I think. So people can just read them and pick up things. And I love it when I get couples that I work with that come in, they're like, all right, here's what we've read so far. They've got a basic understanding and it helps a lot.
Yes. So. Oh my gosh, totally. And in one of the books I read, I can't remember which one it was, but they were talking about some research that they had done, or maybe it was in a podcast I listened to with them, but nonetheless, it was, they talked about this research that they had done where it was like people went to their program and learned about like the having fun together, kind of like reconnecting piece. People learned about solving problems together, or people read their book. And what they found out when people worked on the like having fun together or read their book, they were way better off than the people who were just working on solving the problems, because it's hard when you're feeling disconnected from your partner to then go into a problem. Like the last thing you want to do is that thing. And I was like, that's amazing research to be like, okay, you got to focus on the fun, but that's not actually what we think of.
No, it's
first.
not.
So I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, and that's something that I often tell people is, you know, when we start doing therapy, it's like, leave all the hard stuff here. Like, we'll get to it. It's not going anywhere.
Yeah.
Focus on having fun. Try to do that some more, because you're not doing that. You know,
yeah, it's easy when you're especially parenting, right? And the challenges that come along with that, to like leave the fun, right? And we forget that that's what made our relationship work at the beginning. And we should probably keep doing those fun things, the things that made us us, right? We need to keep doing. So what other ideas for small everyday habits do you have for couples?
Yes. So, you know, as I said, the connecting daily, weekly, that's one. I would say the second most helpful thing that people can do, and when we're talking about parents and how do you connect, is division of labor. But not only that, but appreciating the labor that is done, right? So another little 2-for-1 there, but to me, they're very much linked. So the research is very clear. Men who do more chores in the home have more sex, which, you know, it's not a 1-to-1 exchange, obviously, but it's about alleviating the stress of the physical and mental labor that's often defaulted to women, so that women have the opportunity to de-stress and even begin to think about sex, right? So we're talking very, you know, heterosexual kind of relationship there, of course, but it's so important, right? Both people need to be pulling that second shift. You know, both people are working during the day, whether they're working outside of the home or in the home or some combination. But once that, you know, 5 o'clock, whatever it is, people come home from work, it needs to be second shift for both. It's not just one person's on duty and one person's off work for the day. Because honestly, I mean, you know, you're both on shift until the kids go to bed. You know, if they're old enough to put themselves to bed, great. But otherwise, it's when you get them down and asleep. That's when both people can be done with their shift for the day. And it's hard, right? Because it is like working a, you know, 16, 18-hour day sometimes. But positive attitude helps a lot in that. Seeing it as shared responsibility helps a lot. It's supporting each other and it's appreciating each other for the work that's done. I appreciate you going to work today so that I can stay home. I appreciate you staying home and managing this household. If both people are working, it's, hey, appreciate that we're both out here together doing this and providing, and then we can both come home and be together and do this as a family. Yeah. So it's appreciating what's happening, even though it's difficult. So sort of that positive gratitude mindset does help in that as well. Like, I'm so grateful that I get to do this and have this family to come home to. But I know when we feel unseen in our work, it's a lot easier to lose motivation and have it feel a lot more like a slog, like an everyday, like, I can't believe this is my life, versus something that is, feels more like a blessing.
Yeah. So yeah. And that's a good perspective. I was just thinking, like, especially when everybody, like, they're doing their part, whatever that is, to serve the family, whether it's both parties working or somebody's home and somebody's at work, or there's a mix of that. Like, everybody's doing something to make the home, the house, the family exist and to be in somewhat of balance. And we all like to be acknowledged for what we're doing to contribute to the dynamic.
Exactly. Yeah. No one likes to feel undervalued for the position of, like, it might be easier to say, oh, it's easier for you to go to work and be doing that, or it's easier for you to stay home, but it's not either way. Both ways are hard in their own ways. Yeah. And both ways have their stress in their own ways. And so it's, finding the ways to appreciate that in each other, rather than diminishing it.
Yeah. I love that.
A lot of times with couples, I'll have them go through this huge long list of every chore conceivable, mental, physical task, and see, what are you actually doing and who's doing more of it. And it doesn't matter necessarily who's doing more, as long as it feels like it's, equitable. If someone's working from the home, like, working as a homemaker, they should be doing more because that's part of their job. That doesn't mean they should be doing everything. And I think that's how sometimes it gets perceived. And so having a really healthy division of labor, and it can be flexible and you can support each other, help each other out. If someone's sick, does that mean things don't get done? Or does that mean someone steps in and helps out a little bit more?
Sure.
Those kinds of things, having those active conversations is really, really important, because a lot of people don't talk about it. They just default into naturally what works or what they grew up with or whatever it is. It's got to be an active conversation.
Yeah. Well, and I think sometimes fear plays into that, right? So, like, if I'm not able to do this anymore, or just today or this week or whatever, like, then how will my partner perceive that? And so I think that's with the State of the Union conversations, right? To, like, come back to that part of, like, how is this feeling? Because the more times we're checking in, the less we're going to go off the rails.
Exactly.
Right? Like, we're going to get to stay. Yeah. We're just, like, course adjusting tiny, fine details, right? Like 1 degree.
Exactly.
Or 2 degrees, right? Versus 45.
Exactly. Like, hey, this is going to be a really busy week. I'm not going to have time for a lot of things because of X, Y, and Z. How are we going to get that done? What's going to happen? Can you alleviate this thing so I can do this thing? Can you take over this thing? What is going to happen? And having it be more of like, this is our house for both of us to manage.
Yes.
And that feels really, really good. And when we talk about, keeping the romance, that doesn't feel very romantic, but connection does. And that builds connection.
Totally. Well, and I was just thinking, like, as the woman in my relationship, right? Like, I'm thinking about, like, when my husband just randomly takes out the trash. And I haven't said anything. And it's like, even like when I think about my love language, acts of service historically was not something that really meant as much to me. But it's like, when I have so many things going on, just like somebody taking out the trash can be such a big thing, like, that you don't even think about, or being like, hey, I'm going to take the dog for a walk. And it's like, yes. Oh my gosh, that's amazing. Right? Like, or even helping coordinate the kids to do something like, hey, feed the dog, right? So that I'm just not having to, like, keep all the things in my brain. Like, everybody knows the checklist. And so it feels really good when those things are happening. And so I think it, even though in some houses it may not be equal, but it's equitable, right? It feels good. It feels somewhat in balance of what I can manage and what I need help with. And I'm able to ask for help when I need it. I know that feels good in any relationship, but especially with somebody that you're doing life with.
Yeah. And I think a lot of that is that attunement to your partner as well. And that feels really good. I mean, we talk about connection on a different level, that partner being attuned of like, look how busy my partner is right now. And do they have time for this? No, but I do. So I'm going to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's, it's a really good feeling because then you know your partner's paying attention to you.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that is really helpful. Okay, so how important is physical affection? So let's get into the sex / intimacy, right? Because sex and intimacy they can go hand in hand, but are not necessarily. Intimacy is not always about having sex, right? But just how can we keep that part going? And what advice do you have for keeping the romance alive, the spark going?
Yeah, no, great question. That spark, how do you keep it alive? How do you get it back if it's lost, right?
Mm-hmm.
Both are totally possible. So, the physical part is important in the sense that both people have to, at some point, choose to engage. It is a choice to engage. But honestly, the biggest part of physical affection is helping each other make the mental and emotional space to want to be physical, right? It's all those things I said before about connecting. It's creating or maintaining rituals of connection, which is what the Gottmans call kind of those small moments you get. How do you say goodbye? How do you say hello? Are you giving each other hugs and kisses every day? Are you, what are you doing to connect throughout the day? Phone calls, texts. Do you wait till the end of the day and have a really good long debrief? But if you're not doing any of those things to connect throughout the day, throughout the week, then it's like trying to boil water from cold. Like it's just, in the limited time you have, it's just not going to happen. It doesn't make anyone want to choose to be physical, right? So it's everything of that. But have you heard much about the dual control model?
No, I don't know this. Tell me.
So it comes from Come As You Are, which is a great book. Would recommend for everyone to read. So
It's in my list, actually. I love it. Okay.
But it's essentially gas and brake pedal for desire, right? So every person has a gas pedal. If you push on the gas, you're going to have more desire. You're going to want to have sex. Brake pedal, push on it, it's going to stop you. It's not going to contribute to that desire. So you have to both push on the gas and lift off the brake for anything for anything to happen, for people to be able to make that choice, right? Again, you have to make the choice, but if something slammed on the brakes and you have no gas, why would you make that choice? It's never going to happen, right? It's never going to happen. So, when we talk in generalities, right, men tend to have a very active gas pedal and a less active brake. So they're, it's pretty easy to just get them going, general. So for most women, they tend to have a more active brake and, perhaps a less active gas pedal. Even if it's really active, if their brake is really hard hitting, again, like, you have to alleviate the brakes, but it tends to be a little bit more of this for women. So it takes a little bit more to get them in the mood, right? So it's for men and women, both partners, to understand what is hitting the gas and brakes for both people and knowing what it takes to alleviate the gas. Things like sharing the burden of labor in the house, right? Having a really good equitable division of labor helps a lot. That's most often what I see on the brakes. And step on the gas, right? Things like connection make it happen for women. So checking in every day, every week, maintaining rituals of connection, maintaining some little piece of physical, I think is really important. Hugging every day. The Gottmans talk about the 6-second kiss. 30-second hug will accomplish the same thing if it feels weird to kiss for that long, for as it does for some people. But because it's physiologically bonding, right, to be engaged physically for that long. But cuddling, it's great, not one too. Couples who cuddle more have more sex.
Yeah.
So it's a non-sexual physical touch, and it very much can lend itself to that connection to make you want to choose more. So that's a big piece. So dual control model being one major aspect, one framework with which to work. Because if you can understand what's on your gas and what's on your brakes, then you kind of know the magic recipe. And there's personal responsibility and there's shared responsibility in that for both people. So, and I can go into that more if you'd like, but
yeah. Tell me what that means exactly.
Okay. Yeah. So I think women need to understand their own like personal culpability and things. Like when you have a baby, your body changes, your feelings about yourself change, right? Like I said, it's a whole shift.
Yeah.
And so you have to work on being okay with that new body. It's that body image that I think gets in the way for a lot of people after they have kids.
Yes.
So, understanding your body, how it works now, being okay with it, being comfortable with it. If there's things, holdovers in the past, if you've generally uncomfortable with it, with sex, and now, all these other things have changed and suddenly it's hitting the brakes a lot more than maybe it did before. And so just that understanding of what is there and being willing to work on it. And then just knowing like being a mom is demanding. So you have to figure out how to and choose to disconnect from that. So you can be yourself and so you can be a partner. And that's a really challenging thing. And I do see some resistance to that at times where it's like, well, no, but I'm just a mom. Like, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. It's like, and you can't forget about yourself. It's so important, because you won't be a mom forever, but you will be you forever. If you want to keep your marriage, that's another piece. Like you have to manage all the things. And it's very, very difficult. I know from personal experience, it's difficult and it can be done. It's so the personal kind of aspect in that, men understanding that, the desire works differently for men and women in a lot of ways, again, speaking generalities, but understanding that if they put pressure, it hits the brakes hard. And so they might, need physical anything. Great. Let's talk about that. Let's figure out how it's going to happen. But just to say, I want to have sex and expect that to fall out of the sky randomly without doing anything to help with that, it's just never going to happen. So it's that self-managing the emotions, talking about the feelings that come up because it is difficult.
Yeah. Well, and I want to add something on that part of like, we are hardwired to kind of resist when somebody pushes something. It is, we desire autonomy and independence, right? And when things are forced, it's almost like you feel like you have to stop the train, right? Like you just, even if that's not really what you want, and you might find yourself just reacting that way.
Yeah.
But it's mostly because that's just how we're wired in our brain, right? Like thinking about a teenager who, and like this helps me to understand too when I'm navigating with my kids. It's like when you suggest something, like I remember there were times, especially in my teenage years, where my mom would be like, hey, can you do this thing? And I was literally getting ready to go do that thing.
Yeah.
And I'd be like, screw that. Yeah, like no way. Right. Yeah. So I think, when we push people, right, to like suggesting, being flirty, those are different, right? But being like, let's have sex,
or I'm so angry that we haven't had sex, why won't you have sex with me? We never have sex anymore, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yes. These comments, right, and are important, right? Your feelings are so valid. Right. And so like that's right. But it's also about like thinking about when you talked earlier about how you start the conversation is probably how it's going to end too, right? To be like, hey, I don't know if you've noticed this, but this week we haven't really had a lot of connection, and I have missed being intimate, sexual with you. Is there anything that's getting in the way of that? Or can you talk to me about like what's been on your mind, or how are you feeling about that? Which is hard because you just want to be like, let's just do this, right? Like, because a lot of times, like when both people pick it, it does feel great. It's a great way to reconnect, right? But it's just that there's so much leading up to that. It's not just about that one act. It's about all the pieces that go into that as well.
Exactly. And so much changes after you have kids. And so it's so wonderful that so many men and the lucky women that do, where it's just, easy to hit the gas, easy to lift the brakes. That's great for them. And to understand that, it's just not that easy for so many people and so many women in particular. And so, yeah, it does feel like I have to do all this extra work, but it's really like, do you want your partner to feel loved and valued as a person, or are you trying to use their body? Yeah. Because it's a very different, how you approach it. It feels very different. And one is going, if they feel used, or like their only, usefulness is taking care of the kids and having sex with you, that's much less attractive. Right. And it's not going to lend itself to that partner wanting to have sex. So, men, I know sometimes have that issue where it's like, I have to do all these things just to get her potentially in the mood. And it's like, yeah, all these things that make her feel loved and like a partner, and that actually benefit you as well, because a lot of those things are lost in the relationship. And then if they're brought back suddenly, I often see this, the men will come in and say, I want more sex. When really it's, I want better sex and better connection. And once that starts happening, they're like, oh, okay, so once a week is actually pretty good. I'm okay with that. You didn't need 3, 4, 5 times a week. You needed one really good quality experience where your partner actually wanted to be there.
Yes. So. Yeah. And I think, and, as we're evolving in these relationships, right? Like we start our relationships a lot of times in our like 20s, 30s. Yeah. And then as we're raising children, right? Like we're getting into the 40s and 50s, right? Like, so our bodies are changing too. And just like recognizing that, obviously this is a whole different conversation, but like thinking about like the changes that happen in people's bodies. And so like sometimes what made sense for us at 20 doesn't make sense for us even at 25 or 21 or whatever it is. Like as you're evolving in a relationship, there is changes that happen just naturally, even if kids are not involved, but especially when they are, of like thinking about like, for in my relationship, it's like, our kids go to bed at a pretty good time, but that may not be the best time to be sexual. Right. Exactly. But then it's like they get up early. So that may not be the best. So it's like, having these conversations too, just like openly about like what makes sense, right? Like what does your partner feel about this, and being able to be honest about that. And I think, having somebody emotionally present with you during sex is so important.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes, sex before kids, when you're, younger or whatever, like it can be new and exciting and frequent and all those fun things. And if you allow it to, sex can actually become much more deeper, connecting, gratifying, powerful kind of experience with a relationship that isn't like the deeper layers of commitment. Right. It can be that. And it's just, understanding the ways that you personally contribute and can shift things, and the way that you can shift things for your partner to make it happen. It is give and take. And there's a personal level and there's a relationship level.
Yeah. So it sounds like to me, communication is maybe the most important thing that we're doing in relationships. But you tell me, have I perceived this?
No, I absolutely think communication is key, because it's the basis of connection, right? Connection is the most important thing, and you can communicate with body language. You can communicate with words, with action. Communication is key, but having that really good positive communication, like we said, checking in every day, every week, using the gentle startup, using those things, even using skills like summarizing and empathizing. Right? Are you good at empathy, or are you not good at empathy? If you're not good, it's a skill. You can build that. You can become better at empathizing with your partner, taking their side, taking their perspective, understanding where they're coming from. Summarizing is a basic strategy. It feels very silly to do at first, but just doing things like, what I hear you saying is, and then kind of elaborating so that, you're not taking it through one of your filters and misunderstanding. Yeah. So it's, some of those really basic tools, they sound like obvious when you say it, and kind of stupid even sometimes when you say it, like just empathize. And they're like, well, duh. But are you actually doing it when it matters the most? Yeah. And it's huge, and it changes everything for a relationship.
Yeah. For somebody to be like, oh my gosh, that sounds really hard.
Exactly. Just validating.
Wow. Yeah. Yes.
Because really, do you want to be vulnerable with somebody that you can't trust your feelings with?
Yeah, it's hard to take off your clothes and be like sexual, that kind of intimacy, but then also just emotionally intimate when you're not hearing that, like, you understand how hard this is for me. And it doesn't mean, I think, you know, a lot of times one partner, typically men, want to solve problems.
Yes.
And the empathizing piece is helpful because it's not about solving.
Nope.
It's just about understanding, which actually alleviates a lot of pressure. And so my audience knows that I am more of a child therapist, and I do teens and also like adult women, and I do family therapy. But like, you know, even dads in those relationships with their kids, of like their kid says something and then they're like, okay, let's solve this. And it's like, hold on.
Yeah.
Let's just listen, right? And just be like, whoa, that's hard. Like, what are you going to do next? Or like, can I help you in some way? Right. To offer that ability, because if your solution may be exactly right.
Exactly. Right. So, and, you know, I often encourage people, again, like, you know, small things that they can do when your partner's talking and you feel this urge to jump in and make suggestions, to just say, do you want me to just listen? Do you want suggestions? Do you want help problem solving? You know, what's the intention of this?
Yeah. Defining
it's a very
the role.
simple thing. And if you're starting a conversation and you know you're going to be saying a lot of things that, you know, your partner might want to solve, to just say, I just want you to listen. I have all these things to say. So it can come from both sides. And I encourage it too, as you know, to come from both sides. But
yeah, I love that. And also in teen relationships, just a random throw in, right? I think for all kids, it's good, right? But I love that, like, so much of, as we're talking about this, I'm like, so much of what we're talking about is all what is applicable and good to all relationships, right? Like, yeah. So it's not like, I think, you know, when we think like, oh, I'm putting all this effort into this relationship, but it's like how much better your relationships with your colleagues would be, how much better your relationship with your children would be, how much better, right? Like when you're just doing nice things for each other, you're helping people out, you see a need, and then you do something about it, right? Like the soap dispenser in the bathroom on the floor is empty, right? So you say something to whoever fills the soap and say, like, or you do it if it's something that you can do, right? Like just noticing that, like, it's so nice. Like as I said that, I was like, you know, the other day I went to get soap and I had remembered that it was out. And then my husband had put a new bottle there. And so when I went to it, I was like, it was full. And I was like, oh my gosh, thank you so much. But it was such a small thing. But it was like, I was cooking and it was the soap by the kitchen sink. And so like it mattered at that moment that I really needed soap, and it was there. Right. And I had forgotten to come back and fill it up. So it's like, I think those things really do matter in all the relationships.
Absolutely. I mean, it's the little things. I mean, people talk about it's the little things in life that you should appreciate. And it's the little things that you can do for your relationships that mean the most. It really is. And it's, you know, just predisposing yourself to that. How can I be helpful today? How can I show my partner that they're loved today? You know, just those little things that you can choose to do. And so you could get lost in what it means to be a parent and shifting all of that focus to the kids. You know, or you can say, okay, what's one small thing I can do for my partner today?
Yeah.
It's real simple, and it can take 5-10 minutes. So, you know.
And sometimes there's seconds, right? Like sending a text and being like something flirty, right? Like that you're thinking about, or I'm like, dinner last night was so great, or whatever it is, right? Just like letting them know that you're thinking about them, or you looked really great today, or your hair was exceptional, or that kiss this morning, just like, I just have been thinking about you all day, right? Like these things that keep us connected.
Exactly. Yeah, it goes a long way to, you know, I mean, the ideal would be keep the pot boiling, or not boiling, warmed.
Simmering. Yeah.
Simmering. There you go. That's the word I was looking for. Simmering all the time. Because then it's so much easier to boil the water, right? When you do have that brief moment of opportunity, it's much easier to say, yes, this is the choice I'm going to make right now. And that's what you're looking for, is to create opportunities where you can do that. That's what it's about.
Yeah, before I had gotten married, I hadn't even met my husband yet, but I was talking to this wife, and her husband had been married at the time, maybe 30 plus years. And I was like, what's the secret? Like happily married. They appeared happily married on the outside. And so, and she said, never stop dating.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's great advice, because that makes so much sense as to like, you were doing all these things, bringing flowers randomly, buying something when you thought of them, sending them a text message, letting them know you think about them, prioritizing them. And I think all of those things are so important. And there is a way, obviously different when you have children, because, it's hard sometimes to actually leave the house, right? To go on an actual date. I would highly suggest, if you have the ability to do that, like we scheduled them at our house and we found a babysitter, and this babysitter just comes for a couple hours once a week on a Tuesday. So it's not the most ideal night, but it's great, right? Where we just get to leave and be just like two grownups together and not having to like ask people to stay seated. All the things that you're doing in parenting. And that has been such a good adjustment for us to prioritize that piece. So what other, I think, in my relationship with my husband, I think about the opportunity that I have to teach my kids about what relationships can be like. And we are not perfect by any means. I've never met a perfect person or a perfect couple. That doesn't exist. But that, we love each other, and that we're constantly showing that, so much that our 3-year-old yesterday, we were just like kissing when we were passing, and he was like, no more kisses. That's enough. I was like, nope, sorry. I married him. I get to kiss him. But it was super cute. But so I think, we can often feel guilty prioritizing ourselves and our relationship. What thoughts or suggestions do you have around that? Is that important for us to do?
Oh, absolutely. I think so. I mean, one of the big things that I'll ask couples about at times, depending on what we're talking about, is, what did they see in their relationships growing up? So, I mean, really what you model is a template for your kids to carry on or not want to carry on. And you don't want to be on the other side of that. It's, that's hurtful. Right. So, I mean, to me, it's making the most of the time that you do have, right? Because like I said before, you will 100% have less time, but there is still time, right? So it's, choosing in those little moments to connect rather than try to disconnect. Because I think that's what a lot of people will do now is like, well, let's just turn on a show and then just like not talk. Or let's get on our phones and scroll endlessly and suddenly it's time for bed. Like, taking just a little bit of time to connect with each other instead of just disconnecting from the world.
Yeah. And I love you earlier, you said like even 20 minutes, right? Like if you do want to watch a show, right? Like I think oftentimes we feel like we have to watch the whole thing, and then it's like you're exhausted, and then you're maybe getting to bed late, but then also you're not really connecting because I mean, at least for me, like that's more of a disconnect it from life to watch a show. Even though I like it, it's not necessarily connecting with my partner. And so being able to like make time for if a show is connecting or it does feel good. And I do like to do that sometimes, but not feeling obligated to finish it all or have that be the only thing that you're doing.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, my husband and I lately have taken to watching half a movie, talk about it, and then go to bed. And then we can watch the other half some other time. Ideal? No. But, I feel better when I get more sleep. And so we just, that's what I need. And so he's happy to honor that. We talk about it. We have a good time. We cuddle. It's great. Right. So it's just making the most of the time you do have in that sense. And then also, so one thing I encourage couples to do often is sort of schedule the week in a sense where you're scheduling time. You're not scheduling necessarily what you're going to do, but to have one evening where there are no expectations for connection and it's just you time, where your only expectation is to do something that you enjoy. It allows you to disconnect from, I have like 10 things I could do to clean or whatever, work I need to catch up on, whatever. Like you're giving yourself permission to know this is good for me. I'm going to take time just for myself to do whatever it is I enjoy. So I say evenings, but it can be weekends, obviously, depending on your hobby. But so taking time for yourself and then having a date night in or date time in where you're just spending time in the home together intentionally, in a very intentional way. You're not, maybe you love watching movies together and that's great, but maybe it's something else. Maybe it's getting a new board game, playing a video game together, building a puzzle, building Lego, whatever it is that you enjoy as a couple, or trying something new, but inside the home, because, you know, financial resources and stuff might be difficult to always go out. So plan something in.
Yeah.
Right. And then if you can, if, you know, time, resources, whatever, allow for people to have your kids to go out and do something. And it can be free. It doesn't have to be a cost. There are lots of free events. There's lots of things going on. There's always, you know, it's Colorado. Most of the year is pretty nice. You could go out and be outside, which is great for people.
Yeah.
But to have, you know, sort of those 3 blocks of time, because then the rest of the week, connect in little ways, but there doesn't have to be as many expectations around it.
Yeah.
Right. It kind of alleviates some of the pressure I find for people, where they can plan that and feel intentional and feel involved without feeling like burdened. So that's one thing, as far as time. But then, you know, I encourage people to plan family time and then sneak little moments within that. You know, if your family time is going to the zoo, that's great. Are you going to be 100% only engaged with your kids? No, there are plenty of opportunities for you to engage with just your partner within that dynamic. You know, they're busy doing something, the kids are playing, whatever, you can sit and talk. Or you could hold hands. Maybe that's the only connection you get. And that's great. That's still talking, touching, right? Making jokes, whatever you can do to like connect in those little times.
Yeah.
And then I think another thing, you know, we're in this age of, we must always keep our kids entertained. And it's actually good for kids to learn to play by themselves. And it's good for kids to be bored. So, you know, it's okay. Just make it age appropriate.
Yeah.
You know, you can't expect like a 2-year-old to be occupied for like 2 hours. It's not going to happen. So,
Sure. Yes. Yeah.
but, you know, 15, 20 minutes, great. That's 15, 20 minutes that you can do something. But it's about establishing the boundaries and communicating that sort of expectation of, I am not available right now. Here's what you can do. I'm a big fan of helping my kids start engaging with something and then backing out. Because, you know, usually if you get them started in it, they'll keep going.
Yes.
Often. Maybe not usually, often. And that's true for my kids, and maybe it is for others or not. But, you know, I've seen it work for a lot of people where they just start doing something with them, like coloring. And then it's just, hey, I'm going to go get up and I'm going to go do something real quick. And then they're fine. So sometimes it's just a matter of getting them started. And then in those little moments, don't just hop on your phone. It's tempting, feels disconnecting, but it's actually not doing a lot for anyone. So, you know, time and
we think, I think, yes, our phones have convinced us that it's the best thing, but it's not necessarily the best thing for relationships, regardless of who it is, or for ourselves, right? Like, it isn't as renewing. I don't ever get off my phone and think, I'm so glad I just spent that time there. Like, that was really helpful.
I feel so refreshed. No.
Yeah, you know, but if I spend time with my family, my kids, my husband, right, my friends, doing something like reading, I love to read. And so like just doing that, or I've recently gotten back into knitting. So I'm like, when I do that, and then I have like this final product, I have like something to show for it. Or like, I just finished this book, I get to mark it off my list, right? Like, I love those moments, but the phone doesn't do that for me. Oh my gosh. All of this, Amanda, has been so helpful. Thank you so much for all of your thoughts and words of wisdom. I know that our audience is going to be thrilled to have this information in their pocket.
Yeah, good. I'm glad. Thanks for having me. It's an important topic. It's good to talk about. So yeah, I'm glad you can get that out there.
Thanks again, Amanda. That was all really helpful information. I don't know about you, but there is so many things about this interview that I'm going to be taking away and just like thinking about how I can apply them in my life, and about like just modeling this positive relationship for my kids. With that, I will say thank you so much for your time today. Please like and subscribe to our show. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. And also keep the emails coming with topic suggestions for future shows to accidentalexperts@gmail.com. Have a fantastic day. Some words from our legal team.
The information presented in this podcast is not intended or implied to be a substitute for appropriate professional advice, diagnosis, or treatment. All content, including text, graphics, images, and information contained on or available through this podcast, is for general information purposes only. This podcast makes no representations and assumes no responsibility for the accuracy or information on or available through this podcast, and such information is subject to change without notice. You are encouraged to confirm any information obtained through this program with other sources and review all information regarding any condition or treatment with the appropriate professionals.
What we're saying is, yes, I am a real therapist, but I'm not your therapist.